you're wrong, because that implies kinetic energy of something banging on something. So if you use an inappropriate term, you're biasing your observations. Kind of like the haze, why I call it fumes.
Uh-huh.
If you call it smoke, you're already assuming that fire is the cause.
Uh,
It goes right into your subconscious. So that's why I use these placeholder names. Not a word that's hard to remember or
uh-huh.
too weird, but I think dustification is pretty clear. That needs to be added to the dictionary now.
Two things that I found compelling, especially, were your observations about what was called a bathtub. I don't even know where that word came from. I don't even know what it means until I read your book. I've never read about this bathtub anyplace else. And that is accompanied by these unbelievable pictures in this chapter that you have called Holes. So tell us what a bathtub is, what happened or didn't happen to that bathtub, and then expand on that into these mysterious holes in the ground.
Well, the buildings were built on bedrock that's about 70 feet below the water table in the Hudson River.
So
Manhattan is
their foundations are below sea level, in other words?
right, and Manhattan, real estate in Manhattan's pretty expensive, so it's nice to make more of it. So they built out into the river, and so they built these dikes around where the base was going to go. And made the walls. They call them slurry walls because of the technique they used to make the walls. And they used these tiebacks and so forth. But once they got the insides in the bathtub, sort of the reverse of a bathtub, because it keeps the water out, that kind of helps stabilize it as well. And so there's this delicate kind of dike all around the base of these buildings. That's towers 1, 2, 3, and building 6. Something that a lot of people don't realize, there were 4 towers destroyed that day. 7 buildings altogether were destroyed that day.
Well, if
Building 3 is a tower.
Just the 2 towers themselves, 1 million tons of concrete and steel, if that collapses, wouldn't it absolutely have ruptured these dikes around that bathtub?
Oh, for sure. As a matter of fact, the little scrap of building 6 that remained, which is an 8-story building, there's just a little section of it next to the bathtub wall. They didn't want to take it down with sticks of dynamite for fear of damaging the bathtub wall, so they pulled it down with cables.
Then why wasn't the bathtub wall destroyed when this fell?
If it didn't fall, then it wouldn't destroy the bathtub wall. If the bathtub wall wasn't destroyed, you have to start asking if something fell on it.
Well, this leads one to speculate, Dr. Wood, and I know we're not into speculation. This is the speculation. If you are a terrorist and you want to attack the United States of America to destroy the Empire City, the financial...
If you want to create a lot of destruction, you tip over the buildings.
You would not only tip over the buildings, you would destroy that bathtub, so that leads one to conclude that whoever did this absolutely knew what they were doing. Now...
Well, that's clear, but you don't know what their objective was. And only now am I beginning to understand what their objective was, but I haven't for all this time because I've just been focusing on the evidence. And remember, I say keep sitting there until the evidence comes to you. Don't force it anywhere.
Okay, I'm not going to.
And eventually it does come to you.
Okay,
as you get more pieces.
Before we get to that, and we may get to that a little later, the business of the holes. What created these holes? Why are they so massive and in some cases so deep?
What we do know is there are holes, and they're for the most part empty. Like the middle of building 6, is approximately a big, circular area, cylindrical area, which is a whole lot of smaller vertical cylindrical cutouts that sort of coalesce. It looked like a big cookie cutter, went to it, which we know wasn't used. I've actually had opposition people say, "Oh, she claims a cookie cutter cutout." No, but it is that type of thing where it's just something that's missing. missing voids that are cylindrical in shape. And the smaller ones, there's about a bunch of 24-foot diameter ones, and there's a variety of them. But what we do know is they appear very vertical, and they only go a certain distance, and they need to stop. Like building 6 was 8-story building above ground level, and you can count from the picture inside the hole 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you're standing at ground level. It didn't go below ground level. Later on, you see the picture of the parking garage. That's still pretty much intact there. A little bit could be busted up here or there, but it didn't go to China. It wasn't like infinitely deep. It went pretty much to the ground. Then the one over into the base of building 2 that you see on page 211, that one goes down. It appears down at the bedrock, but they're walking through puddles of water. So
what could have created these holes? It certainly wasn't the collapse, because there didn't seem to be enough weight to create such a hole.
But it's also, if something fell in it, where is the stuff that fell in it?
Exactly.
It's empty. But that's what we do know is it's empty. When
you saw these holes and investigate them, what did that lead you to conclude about their appearance?
That there's something that caused material to go missing, or to get dustified in these odd shapes. It's really tough to not jump to conclusions, but what we can do is look at parallel evidence, how you can recreate the same effect in a lab. That doesn't prove that that's what did this, but it shows that gives you a good idea of a mechanism that can do that.
Okay, now let's get to chapter 11, the business about the cars. That is so fascinating.
And what I mean by toasted cars, they're toast. They're history. Beyond repair, you got to get another one. You've heard that.
If there was no heat in the building, so to say, how could these cars be toasted from so far away?
Well, it's just a piece of data that we notice. We can start noticing patterns. For example, they're up on rubber tires. If there's a certain charge in the environment, the car might, build up more of that charge and not be able to discharge it fast enough if it's not grounded very well.
Some of the cars, how far were some of these cars away that would have made it impossible for them to be in this kind of condition?
Well, there's this big toasted car park, big parking lot that's about 800 feet away, with a sea of unburned paper in between. And the cars were seen to appear to go into spontaneous combustion. There's also some cars on FDR Drive that were seen by first responders. This one guy was trying to figure out. If people tend to want to jump to a conclusion to explain something, and the only explanation he could come up with was that a fireball must have rolled down, from the towers, must have rolled down to where he was in FDR Drive and hit the car, because why else did it go into spontaneous combustion? That was Alan Cook. There were some other cars that were seen there. I don't know where they were toasted, but I do know where some of them were toasted. And there's one particular one, it's on page 214. If you had a rip-roaring fire, a conventional fire going on in that car, those police lights, polycarbonate on top of the hood, the roof of the car, they would have been melted if they're on a hot grill.
Did any other scientists besides you investigate this and begin to question this? Or were you doing this all by yourself?
Pretty much by myself. There's a few friends who have helped me and been in support of me. Andrew Johnson, Russ Gerst, and Morgan Reynolds, of course. He was a good sounding block. I would say, Morgan, where the building go? Is it hiding under that hubcap across the street? It's just so ridiculous.
You have testimony also from people who seem to be a half a block away. were somehow picked up and thrown around.
Right, right. It's as though they were lifted by something. And there's a video of that as well. And they obviously weren't burned by anything. They weren't blown over.
You have a number of pictures of, you have a man in a business suit carrying his valise and others walking down the street totally. They look like mummies. They're absolutely covered in dust. And yet they don't seem to be harmed. They're just covered with dust.
Well, we don't know where they were hiding. Yeah, we're supposed they're hiding. Oh, you're talking about the people, yeah, covered with dust. There's the picture of the three people, and the guy on the right. You can see where he had his tie tucked in.
Yes.
Because there's no dust there. It's a clean part of his shirt.
Oh, my.
So the dust cloud, went over these people and just left them covered with dust. Yeah, they have trouble breathing, and some describe sticking their face in the armpit of their shirt and using their shirt as an air filter. But they didn't get burned.
In chapter 12, what you call tortilla chips, you have a fascinating way of describing things. It makes you want to read it, and then you read it.
But yeah, they're tortilla chips. It's like that became, like a placeholder of that phenomenon, that things were just kind of withered down to very, a big steel beam being like a tortilla chip.
Just all twisted and turned like somebody tied it into a knot or bent it.
Or being, sort of like the rest had turned to dust and blew away, and just not much left. Just withered away to nothing.
And the weird fires that seem to be popping up. Expand on that.
Yeah, in keeping with my naming of things, I could not call it a fire. It's not a conventional fire, at least not initially. So using the term weird fire at least saves you from falling into that rut. It could be a cold fire. Who knows what it is? It appears to be a fire. It could be plasma. We don't know what it was. We weren't there, but it wasn't a conventional fire. You see it sitting on a piece of paper, and the paper's not burning. Just like you see material glowing. And I use my famous phrase, hot things glow, but not everything that glows is hot. And I use the example of an incandescent light and a fluorescent light. No, I'm not saying the tower was built out of incandescent lights, but using that as an example, one is hot, one's not, but they both produce light. They both glow. So it's a different phenomenon. So these weird fires, it's the cooler version phenomenon. It's like a fluorescent light compared to an incandescent light.
Your chapter on the dust cloud. Tell me about that. I mean, because you did talk about the dustification earlier, and yet the dust cloud chapter expands and elaborates on that a little more. So could you do that for us?
Well, everyone's kind of familiar with seeing this dust cloud rolling out, but they just move on from there. They don't stop and look and say, that's weird, and look at it more carefully. Like it rolls out a particular distance and then stops rolling out and goes up, as though a process in it has changed with time or distance. And if you'll notice, the South Tower dustifies first, and the dust cloud rolls a certain amount north and stops. And then when the North Tower dustifies, it rolls that distance, passes that, and goes one block further. Well, the towers are one block apart, so it rolls one block further, which is interesting.
That leads me to sort of jump 2 or 3 chapters, and I'll get back to those, because I'm talking about the dust clouds moving in a certain direction and stopping. You have a fascinating...
But then it goes up, which gets interesting. But the pictures on page 305, this was another clincher, the tipping top of Tower 2. That was one of the things that fascinated me from the beginning, because people know this in physics. If you have a rigid body and it starts tipping, without anything stopping it, it's going to keep on tipping due to laws of angular momentum.
Right.
Due to conservation of angular momentum, it's got to keep going, but it doesn't. That means that it's no